Hey, welcome to Forum, everybody. I apologize that I can't be there today, and I'm grateful for April for hosting. But I've had a medical issue the last couple days. It just knocking me back. So rather than risk not being able to get up in the morning and come down there, I thought I'd pre-record some of the content of what I thought was some of our initial exploration from last week, excuse me, into this idea of how the arts function for us as like a portal into a way in which we can understand ourselves and our world a little differently, which is what I think is kind of the soul's work, right? It's this constant invitation to revelation, to seeing with new eyes, that sort of thing. And just how amazing it was that so many of us spontaneously in that conversation targeted the arts as one of the ways in which we can kind of engage that journey. So today I want to start with just a brief piece of poetics by Loader, who we've used before, just kind of get you centered this morning. So we'll do that and just take a couple deep breaths and sort of allow his poetry to move us into a space where we're open to exploring how the arts might work in our life. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to talk a little bit about the arts, and then the trigger that the arts kind of opened up for me this week was this kind of idea that scholars talk about the emergence of us arriving at what they call the second axial age. I'm just going to talk about that a little bit. It's just kind of good for you to know about and to think about and to reflect on, because I think it has some legs, and it feels like this little group, you and us all together, we're actually living into the second axial age. And while we don't know what it all looks like, we're definitely taking steps into it. And then I want to move into a conversation I had with Chai and Sandra, and as a sort of a model for how it feels like it's working. And then close up with the poetry and leave you then to have a discussion about maybe ways in which you've experienced the arts and how it's opened up new spaces for you. Just try to get a feel for how it really works for you, and to be able to share that with one another. Because then the following week when we get together, we're actually bringing someone to come in and talk about spirituality and the arts. So it's a perfect timing. It's all coming together. So the Loader piece. This is called a piece of poetry that he wrote called "I Need to Breathe Deeply." So I invite you to take a deep breath and just to simply allow his poetics to kind of bring you some ease and space this morning. Grant me an ease to breathe deeply of this moment, this miracle of now, beneath the din and fury of great movements, harsh news, and urgent crises. Grant me attentiveness to the grace of what is possible. Grant me an ease to breathe deeply of this moment, this miracle of now. So I don't know about you, but for me, this week I've been thinking a lot about the arts. What is it about the arts that kind of functions like a religious experience? In fact, I think afterwards I was talking to Jen or somebody, and I said, in many ways, for me, going to the theater, which Lori and I are season ticket holders to Shotgun Theater, going to the theater for that experience feels like religion to me. And yet I've been religious my whole life. So how did the arts begin to manifest my experience of religion when I know how to be religious? I grew up in a religious institution, so I get all that. But there's just something different about that. And I don't know about what you might reflect on, but for me, I think it's a way that it strives, whether it be the visual arts, performance arts, um, spoken word art. There's just so many versions of it, right? Art is trying to channel or give voice to that which we don't always see, to that which we don't always listen to or pay attention to, or it draws us into a particular situation that because we're kind of invited in this sort of safe atmosphere, that we're able to sink into it in a way that awakens something inside of us. It rings a bell inside of our heads, and we're like, wow, I haven't absorbed this experience in that way up to this point. So art, I just think, has this capacity to kind of be invitational, explorational, open, edgy, right? And it feels like it begins to wear down some of the constructs that you and I have gotten to be so comfortable with, and creates new possibilities. And in many ways, I would say, for our time, that really feels like what might be the religious experience that's appropriate for our time. It might not be appropriate for other time, but it's appropriate for our time. So I think art has a way of doing that. And I was thinking the other day too, even like people who are artistic with their economic model, I think is an example of that, right? Where there's someone who paints a different picture of how the economy might work that awakens something inside of me, and that feels super resonant with me. So it doesn't always have to be just abstract philosophical ideas or spiritual ideas. They can be pragmatic ideas too, on the political level, the economic level, the social level, that kind of awaken something inside of you. We talked about that when Amanda Gorman read the poem, as the new administration started, and just it felt like between her and Bernie Sanders sitting there, that piece of poetry has opened up something about the American experience that the rest of the rhetoric could not do. Right. So when I was thinking about that this week, I went back and revisited a couple of scholars who talk about humanity moving into what they call another axial age, axial like a pivot point in the evolution of the human consciousness. And to understand the kind of the axial age we might be moving into, and I'll give you some reference points today, using some quotes and some references that I'm going to refer to. But I think it's important to understand what the first axial age was. So the first axial age, as kind of described by Jaspers, who's one who's kind of put this together, was this kind of historical moment that he calls was very, he uses the term, it's a liminal period. So it was like, we didn't see that clearly, but we were awakening to some kind of new sense of human consciousness. And what happened was it emerged over a period of human history that was a pretty concise period between the 8th and the 3rd century before the Common Era. In that period of time, around the planet, it turns out, there was like this kind of global consciousness awakening that was moving us out from kind of old certainties that had lost their validity, old ways of constructing the way in which we thought life worked that were no longer holding the human imagination or able to sustain us. So there was an unraveling of a way of life at a global level, and then this birthing moment where this new era comes into play. And in that axial period, all these things happened at the same time. In China, This was a period when Confucius and Lao Tzu were teaching, when there were all sorts of new Chinese philosophies that were on the radar screen that were birthing a new level of consciousness. In India at the same time period, the Upanishads and Buddha, a whole gamut of philosophical possibilities again, birthing their way on that continent. In Iran, Zarathustra was kind of birthing a challenge to the worldview and kind of seeing it as this struggle between good and evil. So there was a whole Zoroastrian movement out of Iran. And then some that you might be familiar with, right? The story of in Palestine, prophets like Elijah and Isaiah and Jeremiah. You know, the whole prophetic voice was emerging at that time that birthed the Hebrew people and their perception of life. And then the whole Greco-Roman world was also birthing at that time, right? All the philosophies of Greece and the Romans and all that kind of stuff, right? All that happened about the same time, and it has sustained us since then in some ways, right? And so that kind of model about how the world sees itself, how humanity sees itself, has been sitting around, since the 3rd century BCE. But those systems, according to scholars, are starting to break down. And while we don't know what's coming, some have said that we're moving into a second axial period. And one of the authors that I think puts it so beautifully is Don Cupid. And he summarizes it this way. He says, in the first axial period, ideas were traced back to these great charismatic foundational teachers. And indeed, this belief in some sort of supreme culture and religious significance of that genius in one form or another characterized that time period. But that whole construct of how we imagine what reality is, it's simply out of date anymore. In this second axial period, in the one we're in now, and I think we're all experiencing this, we don't actually need sort of institutional authority or these doctrine systems or big hats or religious laws. We need rather this sort of wide network of humble teachers, of poets of truth and tellers of stories. Our teaching then in this new axial age is that life is all that there is. Life has no outside. This inconclusive banality of ordinariness is all that there is. And we have to make religious happiness out of it. True religion, then, is the practice of making happiness out of the flux of ordinariness by the way we attend to it, the way we cast ourselves into it, identify ourselves with it, and relate ourselves to others within it. True religion is just like saying yes to the very life we're experiencing. Isn't that great? In many ways, I think that's what this little Soul Forum crowd has been doing, right? We gather together in a poetic narrative every week to allow the normal language of how people are experiencing their own soul's journey to give shape or birth our understanding of our experience of life. To me, that feels like that is religious practice, right? That's what we're doing. And it feels a little bit like art, right? So I really was super moved by both kind of the expression, the art-filled expression that came out last week, the serendipity that we're inviting a scholar to come and talk to us about this spirituality and arts next week, and then this kind of potential kind of shift that we've experienced, and certainly organized religion is the victim of it because it's just seen, its pews empty as people just don't feel like that old model is a match anymore. Who's birthing this new frontier? Well, I don't think I would say we're the birthers of it, but we're certainly participating in it, right? We're trying it on to see what it feels like. This last week, then, out of the blue, I had this experience of kind of how this is working. And I don't know, I didn't even see it coming. It was a meeting with Chai and Sandra to talk about Chai's idea of restorative justice applied to environmental concerns. And Sandra wanted to at least have a conversation with Chai just to kind of feel out his interest level and what might be possible. So we got into a Zoom call together, and Sandra started the Zoom call, and I didn't tell her I was going to tell you about this story, so sorry about that, Sandra. But Sandra starts the Zoom call by showing us a picture of where she is. She goes out on her back deck, and she's overlooking Tamales Bay. Now, I didn't know this about Sandra, so this was new for me. And then she goes into the Zoom call after now we've looked out over Tamales Bay, and she begins to tell us the story of Tamales Bay and how much that story is like her story. And in many ways, it mirrors, just the wonder of Tamales Bay itself, right? It's, you can follow Lagunitas Creek for 24 miles as it winds through Marin County, right? And it drops in and it begins to feed Tamales Bay, this ecological reserve. 482 acres of salt marsh, tidal flats, filled with pickleweed, arrowgrass, gum plants, saltbush, saltgrass. There's shorebirds and brown pelicans, the California clapper and the black rail. They all inhabit Tamales Bay. And then below the surface of the waters are striped bass, flatfishes, sculpin, walleye, surf perch, salmon that then find their way back up Lagunitas Creek to spawn. Right? This whole beautiful cycle of life is resting right outside the windowsill where Sandra's meeting us on Zoom. And as she tells a story about her experience and relationship with this beautiful ecological reserve, you could feel her channeling not her perspective of that experience, but trying to channel the voice of that beautiful frontier, that complex biological system, right? All the species, all the movements, all the wonder, all the challenges of that. She was trying to give voice to that in this conversation. And for her, that felt like what Chai was trying to do with this idea of restorative justice, that whose voices are we bringing into the conversation? And how do we allow that to tell the story, the artistic story that might awaken us to something new, something beautiful, something that engages us at a different level? And I swear to God, I literally was frozen listening to her tell this story, because it hit me how it was exactly what we've been talking about. It was the arts at work, right? It was the new axial age unfolding before my eyes. Or maybe as Don Cupid would put it, from now on, there will not be any founding geniuses of the old kind, and great shifts in thinking will take place rather democratically, manifesting themselves as changes in the way in which we speak. For in ordinary language, life has, in effect, already become the new religious object. And the new religion is the practice of wrestling with life, struggling to come to terms with it, saying yes to it, and learning how to live to it in the fullest sense. Your art, your story, the words that you use to give expression to it, that's what matters most. In many ways, I think we're playing around with how to be inside of life, not imposing a story on it, but allowing life itself to tell its story through us and in us, because we are that story, right? And to me, that's like a beautiful, beautiful thing. All right. Let me finish up with Ted Loder's little piece one more time and give you a chance to kind of reflect on the content for today, and maybe just take a moment to plumb, where have you experienced this sort of lifting of the veil? Sometimes I like to refer to it as a thin place, or an experience through the arts or through common language that has kind of awakened something inside of you that you feel is um, a birthing place for your own soul as you say yes to the ordinariness of everyday life. That's the challenge. All right, so take a little cleansing breath, a little pause, and let's finish up with this poem again. Grant me an ease to breathe deeply of this moment, this miracle of now. Beneath the din and the fury of great movements, harsh news, urgent crises, grant me attentiveness. Grant me a grace of what might be possible. Grant me ease to breathe deeply of this moment, this miracle of now. All right, all. Thanks for hanging out with me. In this video time, I'm probably lying in bed, relaxing. So spend some time talking to each other, and then a reminder that next week we're going to be gathering at 10:30. Is that right? Yeah, 10:30. And we're going to have a guest from the Graduate Theological Union come and talk about spirituality and the arts. And I think it's not just going to be a lecture, but it's going to be a hands-on project. So come and get ready to get your hands into the mix. All right? All right, everybody. Thanks, blessings, and we'll see you next week.